I'm going to get into the 4 pillars of the right expert that my team uses when we search for and source the best experts. This is really the meat and potatoes of an expert search for our team. First, we start with the basics. Of course, your expert has to clear a background check to avoid disqualification, and they need the right specialty, subspecialty, education, work experience, etc., to speak to the facts or issues at hand in this case. Oftentimes, when attorneys reach out to their colleagues for referrals, they're basically limited to this category. Next are pragmatics. This is where we get into the more practical aspects. Expert fees are generally hefty. Sometimes a certain professional may be the perfect fit for your case, but if you can't afford to work with them, they're just not a perfect fit for you at that time. Same thing applies for logistic concerns. Many attorneys need an expert close enough to drive to their office or to a site for an inspection. Some who handle major MDLs or class actions will put the most nationally recognized expert on a plane. It comes down to resources at your disposal. If you have set travel expectations from the onset, this will help identify the best expert for you and your firm in this specific case. Litigation history is something that my team sees a range of preferences for. Some firms prefer to work exclusively with experts who have reviewed, say, 10 or more cases and been deposed several times because they don't have the time or resources to coach an expert through their first rodeo. Maybe they feel like it's just not appropriate for that particular case. Others prefer to work with relatively green experts, sometimes all the time, because they want to avoid that potential hired gun bias should that expert have to make a court appearance. Again, this really comes down to your particular preference, both as a litigator and for your specific case. For attorneys who primarily rely on expert directories or their listservs that they have access to source their expert witnesses, this category is about as far as they can feasibly get in terms of screening for the expert that they need. Next is the nitty-gritty. In my opinion, this is really the heart of what makes an expert the right fit for a case. As we saw in the previous case study, technical training is a major factor in an expert's ability to speak to the liability and causation in a case. But beyond that, having the right certifications and licenses is crucial to avoid criticism from opposing counsel. In Florida, for example, out-of-state experts need a special certificate to even act as an expert. Having industry certs and licenses only helps to fortify your expert's testimony for your case. Same thing applies for research and publications. I cannot emphasize enough how important it is to dig into an expert's publication history before you retain them. We've seen and heard horror stories about experts who were completely taken down during cross-examination because their opinion conflicted with research they co-published with a peer 10, 20 years back. Of course, it's incredibly time-consuming to do all the research on your own when you have so many other cases on your desk. So for my team, this is really just another step in our specific search process. We really pride ourselves on being able to take those grueling tasks off your plate and provide you with that critical research up front. Depending on your state or jurisdiction, where and how long an expert is practiced are also important. For example, in Alabama, the expert's credentials need to match the defendant's credentials exactly. And the expert had to be certified in practicing in that specialty at the time of the alleged incident and the 2 years prior. Tennessee has a contiguous state rule that mandates the expert either have been working in a state touching Tennessee or in the state of Tennessee itself the year of and the year prior to the date of negligence. For attorneys who face strict state and jurisdiction requirements, they need to make sure they retain really great experts who also check 100% of these requirements. And that's not always an easy thing to do. Nailing these nitty-gritty elements of an expert's qualifications has the power to set your case up for success. I've had many clients whose cases settled before they even went to trial simply because of the quality of the experts they retained with our assistance. Having that airtight approach to sourcing experts only saves you a tremendous amount of time and money in the long run. Finally, we've got, we call the intangibles. And this is probably the most underrated category, but in my opinion, it has the greatest impact on your experience working with the expert. And when I say intangibles, I'm referring to those X factors that you can't really discern from a CV, your own research, or even their litigation history, but that really have the power to drive your case home. And it starts with availability. Having an expert who's easy to work with, communicates effectively, who responds to emails, treats their legal consulting work with a great deal of pride, and doesn't look at it just as a side project, as some can tend to do at times. Their disposition is another critical factor. You want to make sure you'll have a good working relationship with this professional for the duration of the case. I'm sure with this audience, you all know that some cases can take years and years to settle. So it's important to retain an expert who's pleasant to work with. Someone who can educate you on their discipline. You don't need someone who comes off condescending or arrogant. Not only will it be difficult for you to work with them, but someone who's arrogant won't come across very well to a jury should they eventually have to testify for you. And then speaking of testifying, you also want to make sure your expert has good oratory skills in case they do need to relay facts to a judge or jury. After all, their primary job is to assist the fact finder. And then last, and certainly not least, we have professional associations and conflicts of interest. These often go hand in hand in my experience. I'll bring up another case to illustrate this point in just a few minutes, but professional associations or conflicts can make or break your case. Usually if an expert is associated with a prestigious institution, they'll make that known through their CV and other documentation. But on the flip side, if there are institutions they don't wish to be in association with, or that they're conflicted with, that's often harder for you to determine. This aspect requires more research to ensure you're working with a professional who is 100% credible and on your side. Now, when you look at this screen, this is our perspective and how we categorize these expert sourcing priorities at Expert Institute. We've seen thousands of cases and sourced hundreds of thousands of expert witnesses for attorneys in all 50 states. And based on that experience, we really believe that this process is the most comprehensive way to approach the critical task of finding the right expert for each and every case you work on.